The air at the International Film Awards Gala was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the silent hum of ambition. Xiao Zhan, resplendent in a charcoal suit, navigated the glittering crowd with his characteristic grace, but a low-level exhaustion hummed beneath his polished exterior. He and Wang Yibo had arrived separately, their schedules and the relentless media scrutiny dictating they maintain a polite distance. Yibo was across the room, a striking figure in sleek black, his attention seemingly focused on a conversation with a fellow actor. The quiet solitude of Xiao Zhan's moment was interrupted by a new presence. "You have a charisma, my friend," a voice with a European accent purred, close to his ear. The man was a world-renowned director, known as much for his artistic genius as for his flamboyant personality and direct charm. He was handsome, charismatic, and had a smile that promised secrets. Xiao Zhan offered a polite smile in return, but the man didn't back away. He leaned in, his voice dropping. "I've been watching you all night. There's a certain fire in your eyes. A story waiting to be told. An old-world intensity in a new-world star." He placed a hand lightly on Xiao Zhan's arm, a gesture of familiarity that was entirely uninvited. Xiao Zhan felt a prickle of unease. He was a professional, adept at deflecting these kinds of overtures, but the man's confidence was disarming. He was already composing a polite but firm rejection when a strange sensation swept over him. It wasn't a sound or a touch, but a ripple in the very air around him, a feeling he hadn't experienced since that bizarre incident with the Chronos key. It was the echo of a silent song, a familiar, unmistakable vibration that only existed when two distinct notes were played together. The mind-blowing scene began. Without a word, without a change in expression, Wang Yibo, across the room, simply shifted his weight. His eyes, which had been fixed on the person he was speaking to, flickered for a millisecond, not at Xiao Zhan, but at the director's hand on his arm. His expression remained utterly neutral, but his right hand, which had been resting at his side, rose just enough for his thumb to gently, almost imperceptibly, brush against his index finger, as if he were smoothing an invisible piece of thread. And in that same instant, the entire world around Xiao Zhan changed. The director's charming words became a background noise, a static hum. The touch on his arm felt like a phantom pressure. All of his focus, every iota of his being, was suddenly, powerfully centered on that single silent gesture across the room. It wasn't a signal for help. It was a claim. Wang Yibo wasn't jealous, he wasn't angry. He was simply reminding the universe, in a language only they shared, of a truth that was absolute. Xiao Zhan's internal response was a profound calm, an amused acknowledgement. He turned his attention back to the director, the pleasant smile now completely gone, replaced by a polite, but utterly final neutrality. "It's been a pleasure, but I must excuse myself," he said, his voice clipped and firm. "Enjoy the rest of the evening." He gently, but firmly, stepped back, removing the man's hand from his arm. He walked away, not in a hurried retreat, but with a fluid, unhurried grace that left the director standing alone, a look of shocked confusion on his face. Xiao Zhan didn't head straight to Wang Yibo. He moved as if he were simply wandering, stopping to chat with a few acquaintances, his gaze subtly scanning the crowd until he found his way to a secluded alcove near a balcony. The real, mind-blowing revelation was what came next. Seconds later, Wang Yibo appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, standing behind him. He didn't say a word, just slid a fresh glass of iced tea into Xiao Zhan's hand. He then leaned against the railing, his shoulder brushing against Xiao Zhan's, their proximity a comfortable, silent blanket. "He's very direct," Xiao Zhan murmured, swirling the ice in his glass. "Some people," Yibo said, his voice low and calm, "just don't know when to back off." There was a finality in his tone, a quiet possessiveness that needed no further explanation. The flirtatious encounter hadn't caused drama or a rift. It had only reaffirmed, for them, that their bond was a fortress, a shared reality so complete that it rendered any external intrusion utterly meaningless. Their love wasn't a secret to be revealed. It was a truth so deep, so innate, that it could be communicated across a crowded room with the simplest flick of a thumb. The world had seen a polite rejection, but what had truly happened was an unseen, mind-blowing declaration. The flirtation attempt didn't create a rift, it only made their bond more evident. The director stood alone for a moment, his confident smile replaced by a look of utter confusion. He glanced from Xiao Zhan's retreating back to where Wang Yibo stood, a casual, almost bored expression on his face. The director's charismatic power, which had worked on countless others, had simply evaporated. The subtle snub was witnessed by a few, and within minutes, the hushed whispers began. What had just happened? It wasn't just a polite brush-off, it was a rejection that felt like an unseen force had intervened. The director, mystified and slightly humiliated, simply melted back into the crowd. In the days that followed, the story became a chaotic mess of contradictory headlines. The entertainment tabloids, devoid of any real information, ran with the most outlandish theories. "Xiao Zhan snubs Hollywood director," shrieked one. "Wang Yibo's death glare saves the day," declared another, complete with a grainy, zoomed-in photo of Yibo's face, a look of serene neutrality misinterpreted as simmering rage. The public, without a true narrative, spun 100 different tales, each one further from the truth than the last. The world saw a conflict, a drama of jealousy and possessiveness, but the reality was infinitely more complex. The true aftermath began a few days later, in the quiet, sanctuary-like setting of Wang Yibo's apartment. They were just two people, far from the cameras, eating a late-night meal. Xiao Zhan looked across the table at Yibo, a small, knowing smile on his face. "I saw the headlines," he began, his voice low. "They think you were jealous. They think you sent a death glare." Wang Yibo didn't laugh. He looked up from his plate, a serious, contemplative expression on his face. "That's not what happened." "I know," Xiao Zhan said softly. He didn't need to ask. He had felt it. That man, he was charming. His words were so smooth. But when you did, that thing with your hand, the sound of his voice just disappeared. The feeling of him touching my arm vanished. It was like I was in my own world, and you were the only other person in it. Wang Yibo listened, his eyes unwavering. "I wasn't jealous," he finally said, his voice a low confession. "Jealousy is small. It's for things you're afraid to lose. I wasn't afraid." He paused, searching for the right words. It was like someone was walking on sacred ground. The man was speaking to you as if he could claim you, as if you were available. And I just had this sudden powerful urge to show him that you aren't just a public figure. You're a part of something else. Something that belongs only to us. The mind-blowing revelation was in his words. It wasn't about possession, but about belonging. It wasn't about a threat from the outside, but about the profound completeness of what they had created together. His subtle gesture was a non-verbal act of boundary setting, not with aggression, but with absolute confidence. It was a loving, gentle statement that this world, this symphony they had built, was sacred and not to be trespassed upon. The most amazing, most incredible thing was that he didn't even have to raise his voice. He had simply made a quiet, definitive statement of ownership over a shared reality, in a way that was completely invisible to everyone but the two people who mattered. Xiao Zhan's heart felt a profound, exhilarating shift. The flirting had not created a rift, it had solidified a truth. It had proven that their bond was a fortress, and Wang Yibo, his silent, watchful guardian, was inside with him. He reached out, his hand sliding across the table, and he took Wang Yibo's hand, his fingers lacing through his. "You were right," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Jealousy is small. What you did, that was big." He gently took Wang Yibo's thumb and, in a silent, meaningful gesture, ran it against his own index finger, mirroring the subtle motion from the gala. He looked at Wang Yibo, a radiant, loving smile on his face, a private vow made visible. It was a new language, a new way of showing the world that their love wasn't a secret to be revealed, but a truth to be lived, one that was so complete, it existed entirely on its own terms. The moment their fingers laced together on the press conference table, a single, definitive sound was heard above the deafening clicks of the cameras, a collective gasp. It was an act so simple, so profoundly honest, that it defied all the dramatic theatrics of the entertainment industry. It was their truth, spoken without a single word. The photos of that clasped hand, captured from 100 different angles, instantly went viral, eclipsing every other story, every other scandal. The handshake of love, as the media quickly dubbed it, became the defining image of the year, a new kind of romance for a cynical world. In the days that followed, the frenzied analysis of their every move reached a fever pitch. The public narrative had shifted from wild speculation to a kind of romantic mythology. The airport gesture, once a bizarre mystery, was now recontextualized as the prelude to this grand, public declaration. Every shared glance, every quiet moment caught on film, was now seen through the lens of this new, shared reality. The world had an answer, and in its relief, it began to build a story around them that was equal parts fantasy and truth. But in the quiet solitude of their own lives, far from the cameras, a new kind of challenge began to emerge. The public's love was beautiful, but it was also a heavy weight. The mythology was beginning to feel like a cage. They had successfully defended their private bond from public scrutiny, but now, the public's overwhelming embrace threatened to define their relationship by what the world saw, not by what they felt. One evening, after another long day of filming, Xiao Zhan sat alone in his apartment, the phone in his hand, a torrent of social media praise and speculation. He felt a strange sense of fear, a worry that their quiet, secret world, the world of the radish cake and the garden, was being consumed by the very love that had been so powerful. The mind-blowing scene began later that night when Wang Yibo arrived at his door. He didn't say a word as he entered, just reached for Xiao Zhan's hand and led him out onto the balcony, the city lights a glittering ocean below them. He seemed to sense the quiet fear in Xiao Zhan's heart, the apprehension that their private world had been made public. "You're scared," Wang Yibo said, his voice a low hum. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Xiao Zhan admitted, his gaze on the endless lights. "The handshake of love, the airport rendezvous, it's beautiful, but it's not us. What if we get lost in the story they're telling?" Wang Yibo's response was not a simple reassurance. He looked at Xiao Zhan, and in the dim light, his eyes held a profound, disarming clarity. "They're not making up a story, Zhan, he said, his voice filled with a quiet, powerful conviction. "They're just trying to name something they can't understand. Our love. It's not a secret to be kept. It's a force. It's so real, so powerful, that it can't help but spill out into the world. My gestures, my signals, they weren't just for you. They were for me. I was trying to contain something I felt so strongly that I knew it couldn't be hidden forever. That man at the gala, the airport chaos, the press conference, they didn't create anything. They just gave us a reason to show the world what has always been there." This was the ultimate revelation. The mind-blowing moment was not a grand public gesture, but a quiet, private realization. Their love was not a whisper, it was a symphony that couldn't help but be heard. It was not a fragile secret that needed protecting, but a force so strong it would inevitably manifest itself in the world, no matter how much they tried to contain it. The world's misinterpretation wasn't a problem. It was an honest attempt to name something that was too big for them to comprehend. From that moment on, something shifted. They stopped trying to manage the public narrative and simply started living their truth. It wasn't a grand, deliberate change, but a series of small, honest acts. At a charity event, a camera caught them in a moment of unguarded laughter, their heads thrown back in a shared private joke. On a variety show, they were asked a difficult question, and instead of giving a polished answer, they simply exchanged a look of complete understanding, a silent communication that was more revealing than any interview. The world could call it what it wanted, a romantic myth, a beautiful story, the handshake of love. But for them, it was just life. It was a journey of two people who discovered that their bond was so profoundly real, so entirely their own, that it had become a beacon. It was a love that didn't need to be hidden because it was a truth that was destined to be seen.